I was sitting in the back of a conference room last week, watching a colleague receive her third promotion in 2 years. I looked around the room at people who were, arguably smarter, more experienced, and certainly harder working, all just clapping politely. There was this strange, quiet tension in the air, the kind you feel when you know someone is winning, but you can't quite figure out why. She wasn't a visionary. She didn't have some kind of secret formula. In fact, if you looked at her early work, it was remarkably average. But as I watched her shake hands with the CEO, I realized I was looking at a physical manifestation of a lie we've been told our entire lives. We're taught that the world rewards the best. We're told to wait, to perfect, to sharpen our skills until we're undeniable. But that's not how the world actually works. The difference between her standing at that podium and everyone else sitting in those ergonomic chairs wasn't a gap in talent. It was a single insignificant project she started months ago while the rest of us were still preparing. It was a tiny pebble she kicked off the ledge. And while we were waiting for the right conditions, her pebble was busy gathering snow, picking up speed, and turning into an avalanche that has now made her career look like a force of nature. It's a phenomenon I've started calling the Avalanche Principle. It's the uncomfortable truth that success isn't about being the best. It's about being slightly earlier and more visible than the person next to you. Once you see how this momentum actually tilts the playing field, you realize that every day you spend perfecting is actually a day you're letting someone else's momentum grow so large that it becomes impossible to stop. We aren't competing with talent anymore. We're competing with the terrifying physics of a head start. Our mission today is to pull apart exactly why this happens, because the consequences of this principle they're profound. They dictate success not just in your career, but in your networks, your finances, even your dating life. We've gathered material focusing on the sociological, the mathematical, and even the psychological mechanisms behind this compounding momentum. We're going to explore why early, visible action creates a winner-take-all environment across all these systems. We want to give you a critical lens for understanding where your effort truly counts and where the system is just inherently designed to amplify inequality. We are going deep into the Avalanche Principle, starting right at the beginning with the core sociological idea that explains why, once you have momentum, the rich just keep getting richer.
And that core idea has a name. It's known in sociology as the Matthew effect, though, you'll often hear it referred to more broadly as cumulative advantage.
The Matthew effect. Okay, that sounds biblical.
It is. The sociologists who coined it, Robert Merton and Harriet Zuckerman, took it straight from the Bible back in 1968. But what's so fascinating is that the observation itself is ancient.
So this isn't some new modern phenomenon?
Not at all. It connects directly to the parable of the talents in the Gospel of Matthew. And the specific phrasing that gives the effect its name is, it's chillingly concise.
What is it?
For to everyone who has will more be given, and he will have abundance. But from him who has not, even what he has will be taken away.
Wow. Okay. So it's not just that the rich get richer. It's that the poor get poorer.
Yeah.
The system actively takes from you if you don't have that initial advantage.
Exactly. The initial advantage isn't additive, it's multiplicative. And that's the definition of cumulative advantage. This built-in tendency for individuals or institutions or even research papers to accrue success in proportion to their initial level of popularity or resources or wealth. The starting line is what matters most.
Okay, so let's ground this. Let's look at the original context where Merton and Zuckerman first studied this, which was the world of academia and scientific recognition. This is where you can really see the initial unfairness crystallize.
That's right. Their original studies were all about the inequality in how scientists got credit for their work. They saw this really consistent pattern.
Which was?
Eminent scientists, the ones who were already established, renowned, famous, they received disproportionately more credit for their work than lesser-known researchers, even if the actual quality of the work was similar.
Or even if the junior person did most of the work.
Especially then. It's the classic scenario, right? A major scientific prize almost always goes to the senior, well-established researcher, not the brilliant graduate student who actually, spent years doing the painstaking work.
So why does that happen? Why does this system persist? It can't just be about ego. What are the mechanisms driving it?
Well, it's a system of self-reinforcement. There are a few things going on. First, there's something called the sacred spark theory.
Sacred spark.
Yeah. It suggests that those initial advantages, and it could be anything, superior early training, more talent, just sheer persistence, they aren't just small boosters at the beginning of a career. They have a multiplicative effect that widens the gap over time.
So that first small advantage doesn't just get you to the next rung on the ladder.
It changes the angle of the ladder itself.
That's a powerful way to put it. So it's not just having talent. It's about that talent capturing some initial visibility. That's what really matters.
Absolutely. And then you have the more mechanical side of it all, the cumulative advantage model. This really explains the resource dynamic.
Okay.
Think of it this way. That initial success, whether it's one small publication or just a favorable review, that's the pebble. And that pebble grants you disproportionate access to crucial resources.
We're talking about money, right? Funding.
Funding, yes, but also the ability to recruit the best and brightest graduate students, to get access to superior facilities and equipment. This early access to resources doesn't just maintain your success. It fundamentally locks in your future success. It makes it almost impossible for the competition to catch up.
It's a feedback loop. Success gets you resources, which guarantees you can produce more, which reinforces your success. So the competition isn't about ideas anymore. It's about resource asymmetry.
And critically, this asymmetry is perpetuated by the human element, especially in publishing. Merton identified this mechanism with journal editors he called minimizing search costs.
Minimizing search costs. What does that mean?
Well, imagine you're an editor for a top-tier journal. You get hundreds of submissions. You're pressed for time. You might consciously or, subconsciously select articles from well-known, high-reputation scholars.
Because their name is a shortcut. It's a quality filter.
Exactly. It guarantees a faster review, probably higher impact. So a truly groundbreaking paper from a complete unknown might just languish or get rejected simply because of the author's anonymity.
So the editor is just reducing their own personal risk and workload by trusting the established momentum.
Precisely. And in doing so, they increase that visible scholar's publication rate and citation count even further. Their visibility compounds while the unknown researcher just struggles to get seen. The system rewards familiarity as much as, or maybe even more than, novelty.
This is where the data makes it all feel, well, terrifyingly real. We saw a study on science funding in the Netherlands that quantified exactly how fragile that line between success and failure is.
Oh, that study is fascinating. It's almost a surgical analysis. They looked at these highly competitive grants, and they compared researchers who scored just above the funding threshold versus a group who scored just below.
So in terms of merit, they were basically identical.
Functionally identical. The difference was, basically random noise, an arbitrary cutoff line. But the outcome was anything but arbitrary.
What happened?
The researchers who won that initial grant, the Pebble, they went on to accumulate over twice the funding in the subsequent 8 years compared to the non-winners who just fell short.
Twice the funding. Just think about that. Two groups of almost identical potential, separated by a single review point, and less than a decade later, one group has double the resources.
And that funding gap isn't just about money. It's the ability to hire people, to travel, to iterate on your ideas more quickly. That single difference in resources creates an insurmountable disparity over time.
It's the catastrophic consequence of a tiny initial margin. The system treated the successful group as fundamentally superior, and the funding gap just widened into an abyss.
It confirms that the pebble just needed that one tiny kick to start rolling. But once it's rolling, the rules of mathematics take over, and that makes the outcome depressingly predictable.
Which is where network science comes in and gives us the hard physics. In these vast, complex networks, the Matthew effect has a formal name. Preferential attachment.
Correct. Preferential attachment is basically the rule for how networks grow. Think of any scale-free network, the internet, social media connections, citations between papers. A node, whether it's a person, a website, or a paper, that acquires more connections early on will attract future connections at a proportionally higher rate than other nodes.
It's literally the rich get richer.
It is. It's a snowball effect, but one that's mathematically proven. The biggest nodes, the most popular papers, the most connected people, they just suck up new connections way faster than the smaller nodes.
Yeah.
The disparity just constantly gets worse.
So if a new person joins the network, they're much more likely to link up with someone who's already super connected.
Far more likely. It's a self-reinforcing runaway loop.
Yeah.
Any initial, even minuscule differences in connectivity just get amplified as the network grows. It makes the rich get richer dynamic an intrinsic, non-negotiable property of these systems.
So it's not just a social or economic bias. It's horrifyingly deterministic. The very structure of interconnectedness favors the established winner.
It is, and if you pull the lens back even further, you see this principle at the heart of the universe itself. Cosmologists actually refer to the gravitational instability that forms stars and galaxies as a Matthew effect.
The ultimate Avalanche Principle.
Exactly. In the early universe, you have these areas of slightly higher density. Those are the initial advantages, the cosmic pebbles. Gravity then pulls more and more material toward these denser regions.
And that's how stars and galaxies form.
That's how stars and galaxies form. It's a clear demonstration that this fundamental pattern, where slight initial differences compound over time, is intrinsic to how complexity grows at every single scale. It is literally the physics of existence.
If the universe itself runs on this principle, then it explains why just working hard often isn't enough to catch up to someone who simply started earlier. The entire environment is engineered mathematically and physically to reward that head start. Okay, let's bring this relentless compounding down to earth, to professional life, career progression, and longevity. We looked at models that actually incorporate the Matthew effect to predict how long people's careers last in really competitive fields.
Yeah, these models are so powerful because they move beyond just, subjective feelings about success. They show how this momentum mechanism explains the massive disparity you see in so many fields: science, entertainment, pro sports.
You mean the pattern where you have tons of people with very short careers and then a tiny handful of people with these incredibly long, successful ones?
Exactly that. The models find that this unequal distribution isn't random at all. It's systematically driven by cumulative advantage. Reputation and experience, in this context, they act as the initial currency that buys you your next opportunity.
So once you get the key partnership or the lead on a big project, that success just fuels the next round of opportunities.
Right. And it makes it exponentially harder for the less reputable, less experienced outsiders to break in. No matter how competent they are now, the door just keeps opening for the people who are already inside the room.
What do these models say specifically about initial reputation versus, say, ongoing effort? Because I think this is crucial for anyone listening who feels like they are working incredibly hard but just not getting anywhere.
The models are, they're brutally honest. Researchers found that, yes, reputation grows with effort, but it also declines without continual visible activity. And when they factored in the Matthew effect, they found that people starting with high initial reputations benefit way more from their efforts. They're far more likely to sustain a successful career long into old age.
And the reverse. What about the people with low initial reputations?
That's the crucial part. They found that those people are much more likely to see their careers decline and end prematurely, even if they put in similar or equivalent amounts of effort later on.
Wow, so your later efforts are actually discounted by the system if you didn't pass that initial visibility filter.
That's a perfect way to put it. The initial condition, that first kick of the pebble, it sets this massively disparate trajectory. It means if you're a late starter, you have to work exponentially harder just to get the same results as someone who started earlier and leveraged that initial reputation. It's a systemic penalty for inertia.
And this compounding goes far wider than just individual careers.
Oh, much wider. Which brings us to something called Cumulative Inequality Theory, or CIT.
Right, this moves beyond just individual achievement and looks at how these forces affect entire life courses and social groups.
Exactly. CIT is an integrative framework. It's designed to show how system-generated inequality manifests and just gets worse across a person's entire lifespan. It says early advantages or disadvantages aren't static. They are systematically amplified by social institutions, by economic structures as people age.
It's the theory that explains why the gaps don't close.
Right.
They become permanent.
They do. It's the rich get richer, poor get poorer, applied to nearly every facet of human experience. Think about health disparities, for example.
Okay.
Adverse circumstances early in life, say poor nutrition or chronic stress, they don't just create an acute problem that you get over, they create a persistent vulnerability. That vulnerability then intensifies health-harming patterns across your working years, your family life, and into retirement.
So the initial struggle compounds over decades,
leading to far worse health outcomes later in life compared to those who started with health advantages.
And there are examples of how even a physical characteristic can act as an early disadvantage that then compounds into this massive systemic inequality, right?
The research on socioeconomic attainment is really clear on this. For instance, studies have linked early life obesity not just to physical issues later on, like disability, but to social and economic outcomes. The research notes that being overweight is often tied to a negative social stigma, and that stigma influences fair labor market positioning. It can affect hiring decisions, promotion prospects, and ultimately, your wages.
So an early physical disadvantage amplified by social perception, leads to lifelong cumulative inequality in what you can earn.
The system doesn't just measure your current performance, it constantly refers back to and amplifies your earliest conditions.
And this plays out dramatically in other social systems. I'm thinking of the justice system.
The studies on cumulative disadvantage for minority groups there are just stark. They focused on markers of early disadvantage, like high set bail amounts and the pretrial detention that results from that.
Right. If you can't make bail, you might lose your job. You can't prepare your defense as well. You're immediately positioned for a worse outcome.
Exactly. And the data show that this cumulative disadvantage, this initial inequality generated by the system, led directly to a non-reduction in sentencing length for African-American males with prior felony convictions. The system, by creating these early resource inequalities, amplifies the eventual penalty.
The initial friction points become permanent brakes on your life. The weight of past disadvantage just crushes the potential for future equality.
It does.
Okay, let's pivot from these huge systemic issues to something like cultural momentum, because it's just as driven by this principle. And we have the perfect illustration, the Music Lab experiment.
Ah, yes. The Music Lab experiment was so clever. It was designed to isolate and measure the precise impact of social influence on what becomes popular.
How did it work?
Participants were given a list of unknown songs from unknown artists. The control group just listened and rated them based on quality. But the experimental groups, they could see popularity rankings, how many times a song had been downloaded by other people.
So it's a perfect simulation of like a Spotify chart or a bestseller list. It provides that visible early momentum.
And the results were decisive. The people who saw the popularity rankings were hugely biased to choose those songs. It created this dramatic rich get richer phenomenon.
So a song that got a few early downloads just snowballed.
It snowballed. In some of their simulated worlds, a mediocre song that just happened to catch an early break became a massive hit, while a demonstrably superior song that started slow just stayed obscure.
So it wasn't about the inherent quality of the music. It was the perception of his early success, which then became a self-fulfilling prophecy.
That was the crucial finding. Social influence, seeing those download rankings, had the biggest effect on boosting future downloads. It far outweighed marginal differences in quality. That perception of success is self-fulfilling in cultural markets.
It's why the top 3 movies on Netflix feel like required viewing, even if you've never heard of them. Their visibility isn't a symptom of their quality, it's their most powerful asset.
And that visibility just compounds itself. It's marketing that's built right into the system. Once a product has that initial momentum, that pebble of popularity, it gathers an avalanche of social influence. It makes it almost impossible for newcomers, even superior newcomers, to catch up. The market operates on the logic of what are other people doing, not what is objectively the best.
Okay, now let's step into the hyper-accelerated, winner-take-all environment of the digital world, because these principles just get amplified into absurdity there. And we have to talk about online dating. It's like a perfect, harsh simulator of the Matthew effect operating on personal status.
Yeah, if you want to see the Matthew effect on steroids, dating apps are the place to look. When you analyze the statistics, you don't see a standard bell curve. You see an extremely harsh power law distribution.
Especially for men.
Especially for male attractiveness or popularity, yes. This suggests that the attributes women prioritize for that initial filtering often follow a power law.
Okay, can you ground that term for us? A power law distribution versus a normal or bell curve distribution. What's the difference?
In a normal distribution, a bell curve, most people are clustered around the average. The extremes are rare. Most everyone is fairly close together.
Right.
A power law is the long tail phenomenon. It means a very small number of entities, in this case men, have an enormous share of the resource, which is attention or matches. And the vast majority have very, very little. It's the ultimate winner-take-all scenario.
And what are the attributes that act as those power law filters for men in the dating market?
Research suggests it's attributes that are linked to social status and proxies for dominance. And the most interesting proxy, because it's so immediate and you can't fake it online, is often something physical, like height.
And why does this one mechanism create such extreme inequality?
Because that early status accumulation creates a definitive winner-take-all trajectory for male sexual market value. The statistical outcome is just merciless. The gap between the top tier and the average widens incredibly rapidly. The few men who qualify on those early dominance proxies, they get access to virtually the entire market pool. Their success is amplified exponentially.
while everyone else is left competing for scraps.
Exactly.
The sources had a really powerful anecdote that crystallized this. It was the experience of a man who was 5'4", but highly successful financially, outgoing, in peak physical shape, a professional fitness instructor. And he said his dating life was just miserable in his 20s and 30s.
Right. He noted that despite all his success and physical optimization, he felt he would have failed miserably on dating apps. And he contrasted his struggle with a hypothetical tall man who might not be successful at all, but who still has a much better shot.
It just illustrates how these dominance proxies like height function as these unforgiving early filters. The digital environment takes this one easily measurable trait and uses it as the initial kick for the pebble.
And if you don't get that initial kick, the compounding effect of visibility and positive feedback, it just never starts for you. It's a systemic lockout from the momentum game. And this isn't just theoretical. The data confirms that women on apps often set hard filters for height, sometimes at 5'11" or above.
So an average height man, say 5'8", is just excluded from the search results from the very beginning.
From the absolute start. That one filter limits the available partners to only the top 15 or 20% of men. All the attention gets concentrated there. It forces the vast majority to struggle for a tiny portion of the remaining attention. It's the Matthew effect in its purest, most immediate form.
Now, moving from that harsh high-speed market to the professional environment, the same dynamic is mirrored exactly. The currency just shifts from dominance proxies to visibility and networking momentum.
Yeah.
We talked to a sociologist about what they call the atomized social hierarchy.
Right.
And I came across this fascinating case study about a consultant, let's call her Sarah. When she moved into a new company, she didn't wait for a big project to make her name.
Oh.
From day one, she started using what this sociologist called micro-signaling.
Micro-signaling. What does that mean in practice?
Tiny, almost insignificant acts of networking. She'd attend the unimportant mixers that everyone else skipped. She'd send brief, low-stakes follow-up emails, make small, visible contributions in meetings that didn't seem to matter.
So these are microscopic advantages, barely noticeable efforts at the time.
Exactly, things that took 5 minutes out of her day. But within 18 months, these micro-signals compounded into what they called a social moat.
A social moat. I love that term. How does that work? How does micro-signaling build a moat?
Well, Sarah, the early mover, she accumulated enough subtle social currency. People recognized her name, they recalled her being present, they had a baseline of trust built through all this non-critical contact that it became an insurmountable barrier for any late mover.
Even a late mover with better credentials or more raw talent.
That's the key. Her accrued networking momentum beat their superior qualifications. Sarah wasn't necessarily better. She was just present and active early, gathering those microscopic advantages.
So the implication is, well, it's pretty sobering. Credentials and talent aren't enough if the network has already crystallized around the person who is simply there first.
Being present and active is the currency. And that currency compounds. The latecomer faces this exponential resistance because they aren't just joining a network. They're trying to dismantle someone else's compounding momentum.
And we see this play out systematically in scientific visibility, too. Going back to those network studies, even in fields that are supposed to be meritocratic, like physics and computer science, you see preferential attachment and also homophily driving highly unequal visibility.
Homophily. That's the idea that we like people who are like us.
Essentially, yes. It's the tendency for individuals to prefer ties with others who are similar to themselves, same background, same school, same social circle. And when you combine that with preferential attachment, it ensures that existing advantages get reinforced.
So we're not talking about outright malicious bias. We're talking about the network structure itself, just automatically reinforcing existing advantages, which often fall along certain demographic lines.
Correct. The inequality is often asymmetric and structural, is rooted in life demands. Studies tracking careers found that women, for example, face persistently lower visibility, fewer co-authors, fewer citations over time, and this isn't strictly a performance issue.
What is it linked to?
It's linked to structural factors, things like higher dropout rates, shorter careers overall, and unequal parental or caregiving obligations, which just prevent them from gaining that sustained, initial, visible momentum in those crucial early years.
So if you don't have that sustained momentum early on, the network never grants you the resource access, and it becomes exponentially harder to catch up.
And the network dynamics actively make the problem worse through a concept called triadic closure.
Okay, what's that?
It's just the observation that if I'm connected to two different people, there's a very high probability that those two people will eventually connect to each other. It's friends of friends becoming friends.
That sounds pretty normal, just how networks fill in.
It is natural, but it creates something called induced preferential attachment. By focusing on linking to friends of your friends, you're naturally exposed more often to the existing high-degree nodes, the popular established people, because they're connected to more of your friends.
So it favors them. It ensures the most popular people are continually reinforced with new connections and visibility.
Exactly. The network structure itself, just by trying to close triangles, ensures the popular get more popular. The compounding is mathematically baked right into the social fabric.
So we've covered the external forces, the sociological and the mathematical, that dictate who wins and who loses. But there's a profound internal obstacle that keeps brilliant, capable people stuck, watching everyone else's pebble turn into an avalanche. And that's the tragic misalignment of the desire for perfection. I saw this fascinating, though kind of tragic, case study on a professional networking site about a developer in Silicon Valley. Let's call him Elias. And Elias was a victim of what we could call the perfectionist's mismatch.
A perfectionist, right?
He was, by all accounts, one of the most talented engineers in his cohort. But he spent years refining a single piece of software, refusing to launch it, refusing to seek investment, until every line of code was flawless, every feature polished, every bug squashed.
And meanwhile, his peers were
doing the exact opposite. They were shipping messy, iterative, imperfect products, and in doing so, they were acquiring resources, capital, users, reputation incrementally.
And that's the key.
It is. The painful comparison is that Elias waited for the perfect moment. But his peers, by being early and visible with their imperfect products, created enough momentum to permanently displace him from the market. And this isn't just poor business sense. It connects to a deep underlying biological instinct.
This is a perfect illustration of the mismatch principle from evolutionary psychiatry. The field argues that many psychological traits that were adaptive for our ancestors, traits like the urge to wait until everything is safe and secure and perfect, have become massive traps in the modern world.
So Elias was acting on a deep, fundamental instinct to minimize risk, but that very instinct cost him his chance in the market.
Precisely. The core argument is that the human brain is biologically wired to avoid risk and delay action until a situation feels secure. In the ancestral environment, a world of scarcity, high physical stakes, very few second chances waiting for perfection was adaptive.
Right. If you launched a flawed spear or made a messy shelter, you could die. The cost of failure was high.
So inertia until you were absolutely certain was rewarded. But the modern socioeconomic environment rewards the exact opposite. It rewards immediate, visible resource acquisition, even if the product or action is messy or imperfect.
The cost of a buggy software launch is just a patch and maybe a public apology. It's not physical death.
Exactly. But the reward for that early visibility is momentum. Elias waited for the perfect product. His peers, by shipping imperfectly, acquired the capital, the early user base, the reputation, the critical resources incrementally. And that incremental acquisition is the only thing that sustains survival in a market defined by momentum.
They use those early... This deep dive has shown us that the person who wins isn't necessarily the most talented or the smartest or the hardest worker. They are simply the one who gained a head start and let the terrifying physics of the system compound their advantage.
Right.
We started this conversation by looking at how a seemingly average colleague managed to turn a single, insignificant project, a pebble, into an unstoppable force, an avalanche, while her more capable peers just sat and watched. We've traced this avalanche principle across every critical domain of life.
From the sociology of the Matthew effect in that Netherlands funding study to the hard math of preferential attachment in networks.
We saw its influence in the winner-take-all environment of digital markets and career moats, and finally into the biological trap of perfectionism that keeps the highly talented on the sidelines.
And the core insight, the one that's reiterated mathematically and sociologically, is that success is all about compounded momentum. The early advantage, no matter how microscopic, dictates the eventual scale of success. The rich get richer, not because they suddenly try harder later, but because their resources, their wealth, their social connections, their recognition, they compound at a higher nonlinear rate from day one.
It's like that investor analogy. You have the investor who started young with just mediocre returns, but patiently let them compound for 15 years. And you contrast them with the one who waited for the right moment to start.
Same strategy, same effort eventually.
But the starting date fundamentally defined their financial lives. The time lag created a chasm of passive income that mere late effort can never, ever bridge.
And that is the chilling final synthesis of the Avalanche Principle. It's the most strategically relevant takeaway for you listening. The time you spend agonizing, analyzing, perfecting is simply time that you are lending to someone else's momentum. The physics of a head start is terrifying because the advantage it confers grows exponentially, not linearly. Every moment you hesitate is a day spent letting an opposing force grow too large to overcome.